Drop stories are an essential part of your repertoire. Really, your drop stories are your stories, your illustrations. They can be used during presentations. They can be used on the phone, but I call them drop stories because a lot of times when I'm doing drops and I'm trying to be personable and I'm trying to sell the sizzle and not the steak, meaning I'm trying to create excitement. I'm trying to get people to kind of lean in forward and listen to me, like that E.F. Hutton commercial. I don't want to just spew out bullet point information. I'm trying to sell interesting stories. I'm trying to paint a picture that's worth 1,000 words, right? And so your drop stories are the personal stories that you have. Now, yes, you can borrow from other people's stories, but it's so much better when it's one of your accounts or something personal. And so a couple of my stories, just to give you an example, one of my favorites is Nick's eyeball. And I say it that way because, I want people to instantly kind of, perk up and think, Nick's eyeball. I mean, we normally don't describe things that way. And in fact, the way the story goes is, one of my co-workers, their husband was working a little weekend project doing some nail gunning. And lo and behold, he wasn't wearing any goggles or anything like that. And then using the nail gun, the nail ricochets and stabs him in the eyeball. Now notice I'm trying to be somewhat graphic and somewhat, paint that picture of, this is a real story, right? The more descriptive you can be, the better the story is. And so, Nick's using the nail gun and he takes a nail to the eyeball. Now, ironically, the same day Nick was doing his nail gunning, me and my brother were working on his barn, and we were using nail guns, of course, with no goggles, and of course, we're ex-athletes, we're not carpenters. And so this situation that happened to Nick, well, obviously this is an emergency situation. They rush him off to the emergency room. They, have to take care of him right away. This is the eyeball. So you're talking about specialists now. And so they had to now cart him to another hospital that actually has specialists for eyeballs and then the rehab. And so as you can imagine, the expense of all this, of the experts, the multiple ambulance rides, the multiple hospitals, and all the tests and x-rays and MRIs was extreme. Now, fortunately for Nick, he did have insurance. But what was the key factor for Nick? Well, luckily for Nick, he had policies with Colonial. And because of that, because he had an accidental policy, because he had a short-term disability policy, because he had a hospital indemnity or hospital stay policy, all of those combined with his insurance program. And so Nick was not out of pocket, even though in this very, very scary event and him being out of work for a few months, he was taken care of. He was still able to pay his mortgage, still able to, pay for his car. Another example I have is Jeff's thumb. My brother-in-law, who's a land surveyor and loves to, work with wood over the weekends, and had just gotten this brand new table saw, right? And he's got this brand new table saw, and Jeff's worked with wood for many years, and he's cutting some wood, and out of nowhere, his hand gets caught with a piece of wood. He gets sucked into it, and bam! I mean, like a hot knife through butter, the saw rips through half of his thumb. So it cuts half of his thumb off in one shot. I mean, blood's everywhere. They got to get him in the car. It's a messy scene. Jeff luckily had, some great insurance. And so his hospital medical bills were taken care of. But again, he's trying to run a small business. He's the principal owner. He's the principal player in the business. And so, Jeff being unable to use a typewriter, unable to use the equipment, had to go out and hire some extra people in order to take his place. And so Jeff was able to use the policies that he had with Colonial to take those cash payments and use those payments, not on medical bills, not on hospital bills or doctor's bills, but to use those to help keep his business rolling. Another one of my friends in church, he works in construction, and he was crossing the street in construction, and a car ran the red light and hit him in the crosswalk. And so you think, well, he was working, L&I is going to cover it. He's a union guy. And yes, all those things were true. But once again, L&I takes months to settle the claim. And there were some questions because, yes, it was on the job, but it was in the street. And so there were some different issues with that. I believe it took, about 8 months to settle things with L&I. But he had policies in place. And so even though he was out of work for 7 months, he was still able to pay his bills even though he was out of work and waiting for the L&I claim. So that was very, very important. In fact, Jim had some concussion issues and back issues because of being hit by that car. Another friend that I know, Frank, is a horse guy, and over the weekend the other day he was, changing the shoes of the horse, and lo and behold, the horse donkey kicks him in the ribs. Happens over the weekend. There's no L&I claim. So what's he gonna do? Well, fortunately for Frank, he had gotten a couple policies that I'd recommended, and so once again Frank was totally covered from his accident. He ended up missing 3 days off of work, and he didn't have any elimination days on his policy, so he was taken care of. Another one of my favorite drop stories, is actually my own son. My son, 17 years old, healthy as an ox. Never gets sick. One of those deals, he comes home, has a little cold, no big deal. Day 2, he still kind of seems to have that little lingering cold again, whatever, no big deal. Day 3, day 4 hits. It's day 4 now, it's 11:30 at night, and he's not feeling well. And you know how at night that sickness builds and builds and you just feel terrible? Well, that's where he was, and now it was day 4, and he couldn't breathe and he couldn't sleep, and had bags under his eyes, and this is normally a healthy kid. Well, my wife at that point, that's enough. Well, normally at 11:30 at night, what are you going to do? You have to go to the emergency room. And so what we were able to do, and this was using Colonial POPs programs, was we were able to use MD Live. And so my son and my wife got on the computer, were on the internet. Within 2 minutes, they had a board-certified doctor, 14 years minimum experience, going through, asking him the questions, coming up with the diagnosis. As they were doing that, I got in my car and started driving to the closest Rite Aid that was going to be open at that time of the night. And so the doctor was able to give my son a prescription, forward that to the Rite Aid, and it's 45 minutes away. Right as I'm driving up, the prescription is filled. I use my wellness card to get my 50% discount off of prescriptions, and I've got his medication. I'm back home with for him ended up being about a 50-minute wait. He's got it in hand, sleeps like a baby, everything goes away. All this using my MD Live and wellness card. And so you have stories of your own, and others and their stories. Use your stories, use your drop stories to illustrate, to create urgency, and to get people excited. Sell the sizzle and not the steak. Use your drop stories.